Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'm delighted to welcome you all to this webinar on a very important topic. It is the evening time here in Delhi for me. This webinar is going to be on establishing linkages and opening doors for students on joint degrees and articulation programs. I consider this as a very timely webinar in the light of the draft regulations that have been published on February 17th by the UGC here in India, inviting suggestions on the draft for enabling academic collaborations between Indian and foreign higher educational institutions to offer joint, dual, and twinning degree programs. So this is the first time ever in India, an architecture is being established to enable partnerships. And I'm delighted to be moderating this session today of a very illustrious panel. I wanted to also thank the US Consulate General Mumbai for leading and partnering with Sannam S4 for this session. I welcome Consul General Rantz to this session. A few words to introduce the Consul General. Before I introduce the CG, I have a few housekeeping rules that I wanted to discuss with the audience. Please pop in all of your questions at the Q&A button that you see at the bottom of the screen. And I would also request you to put yourself on mute. Once we finish the moderated discussion, the panel will be very happy to take your questions. And I'm delighted to introduce the Consul General, David Rantz, a native of New York and a career diplomat since 1992. David Rantz is the Consul General of the United States of America in Mumbai. Mr. Rantz previously served as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for South Asia and as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Pakistan. Prior to that, Mr. Rantz was Director of the Office of Pakistan Affairs. His previous assignments include leadership positions at the US embassies in Cairo and Baghdad. Mr. Rantz has also served in Rabat, Jerusalem, and Karachi. Over to CG Rantz for introductory remarks. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Lakshmi, and thanks to Mina, Roger, and Delia for joining the panel discussion today. Good evening to everybody who's joined us. Thanks for joining what I think is going to be a really rich discussion on joint degree programs between US and Indian universities. The US-India relationship is stronger today than ever. We have seen support for our bilateral ties blossom throughout the United States through multiple administrations, both Democratic and Republican. And I fully expect this relationship to continue to grow even closer in the coming years. Underpinning our partnerships on issues like trade and investment, defense and security, healthcare, environmental concerns, and agriculture, just to name a few, is the same core value our countries subscribe to education. In many ways, our higher education ties are the foundation of the US-India partnership. The individual stories of Indians who have gone to the United States for undergraduate and graduate studies and achieved immense success, founding successful companies and expanding the frontiers of human knowledge through research, are countless and compelling. The accumulation of stories, such as those of Ratan Tata and Nobel Prize-winning economist Abhijit Banerjee, just to name a few, are a testament to the benefits that accrue to both the United States and India when bright and ambitious Indians pursue higher education at US universities. This is why the US diplomatic mission in India pursues among its top strategic priorities the promotion of bilateral educational partnerships. Joint degree programs, student exchanges, and research collaborations play central roles, not just in strengthening our ties, but also in fostering the talent that will help our two countries tackle the challenges of the future. Since the Indian central government's announcement of its new national education policy, people across the education sector have sought to understand what it will mean for their institutions. I'm happy to report that in my meetings with vice chancellors of universities across Western India, there is great excitement about the NEP and a consensus that it represents a huge step forward on multiple fronts. We have taken keen note of how the NEP underscores the role of partnerships with higher education institutions abroad in the advancement of India's education system. I was happy to learn that India's University Grants Commission very recently circulated draft regulations that would allow joint degree programs, making today's session particularly timely. Joint degree programs lead to a deeper and more sustainable type of relationship than many other international linkages in terms of innovation of curriculum, exchange of students and professors, and access to expertise. These programs are built on robust academic collaborations and accrue important benefits to individuals, institutions, and national and regional educational systems. These degrees allow institutions to work with partners offering programs or specialties that are not available at their own university and play a central role in producing research and innovation. For the student's perspective, studying at US universities enables them to acquire globally relevant skills, conduct in-depth research, develop critical thinking, and learn the indispensable skill of cross-cultural communication. It is a life-changing experience for most students, giving them a strong understanding of US culture and society, and preparing them for future success in their careers. Joint degree programs are especially beneficial for many students as they allow them to benefit from both US and Indian educational experiences. Students with joint degrees are better equipped for the global workforce, have stronger understanding of international markets, and have developed a broader network of peers and mentors. Furthermore, a joint degree helps make a US degree more attainable and affordable for many Indian students. These programs also greatly benefit US students. Having spent a year of my undergraduate studies at a foreign university, I can personally attest to the value of studying abroad. Indeed, the experience for me was dispositive in my decision to pursue a career in diplomatic service. Inviting American students onto Indian campuses will foster greater appreciation in the US for Indian culture and enrich the diversity of experience for Indian students who study at home. The presence of American students gives Indian students access to US diversity, values, and thought processes, and fosters greater cross-cultural communication between classmates. For their part, Americans who study in India gain a profound understanding of this diverse and historically rich nation, and often later contribute to US-India business, education, and governmental relations. Despite their many benefits, joint degree programs can be a challenge to arrange. The two institutions have to teach more or less the same course, and the curricula have to be precisely coordinated, a labor-intensive prospect for any school. Today's session will provide important information on navigating this process, including an overview of the future of US-India educational ties, different types of articulation programs in India and the US, and best practices to implement partnerships with US institutions. I look forward to seeing more academic partnerships where Indians go to the US to study and American students study in India. Thank you very much and enjoy the program.
Thank you, Consul General Rantz, for those remarks. I now have the honor and privilege of introducing a brilliant panel. Today, we have Dr. Roger Brindley, Professor Delia Hennigan, and Ms. Mina Saxena. A few words to introduce our panel. Dr. Roger Brindley joined Penn State as Vice Provost for Global Programs on April 6, 2020. In this role, Dr. Brindley oversees a staff of nearly 100 professionals who manage education abroad programs, advise and support international students and scholars, and facilitate the university's many international partnerships around the world. As Vice Provost, he promotes Penn State's comprehensive international strategy and works with senior administrators to guide Penn State's international agenda. Prior to his appointment at Penn State, Dr. Brindley had been Vice President at US of World at the University of South Florida, where he oversaw global engagement for USF and international student success initiatives for 5,000 students from 147 countries and for over 2,000 students completing academic experiences abroad, and 1,200 USF faculty conducting teaching, scholarship, and research overseas. Next panelist is Professor Delia Hennigan, who is the Director of Education for Sannam S4. Delia brings 25 years of senior hands-on experience of higher education as an academic and a specialist in international strategy and operations. This experience includes over 15 years as a Dean and Director of International at a leading UK university with responsibility for the development and delivery of internationalization strategy for the university, including student recruitment and partnership development. A chartered marketer and manager, Delia sits on the advisory boards of leading higher educational bodies and has always remained one of India's greatest champions. I have as our third panelist today, Ms. Mina Saxena, who is Senior Management Education Professional with over 3 decades of experience. She is currently Director of International Linkages at NMIMS, which is deemed to be university. In this capacity, Mina provides leadership to help transform NMIMS University into a global campus in terms of its teaching, research agenda, and strategic engagements. Prior to NMIMS, Mina was at the Indian School of Business, where she worked to over 10 years in various roles, including the Director of Alumni Engagement, responsible for strategic planning and execution of an engagement plan for fostering strong relationships and goodwill with 9,000 global alumni population. Prior to joining ISB, she served as the Vice Principal of Management and Commerce Faculty at Jai Hind College, Mumbai. So I would like to welcome Professor Hennigan to share a few insights about the NEP. And after that, I would welcome Dr. Brindley and Ms. Mina Saxena to have a discussion around some of the key questions that would emerge as a result of Professor Hennigan's presentation. Over to you, Delia.
Thank you, Lakshmi, and it's a pleasure and a privilege to be able to talk to everybody today and to be sharing the panel with you all. My colleague is going to move these slides for us, so I do apologize if we occasionally maybe are not quite as smooth as we should be, but I think well, I will just launch in. So I'm going to just take a few minutes to talk a little bit about the National Education Policy, which, as we all know, was launched in July of this year. Some of the key highlights: it's an absolutely groundbreaking piece of work, and will have a huge impact on how we're able to work in this space together between the USA and India. So in this presentation, I'm just going to look first of all at some of those highlights, because they will be enablers to allow some of these things to happen. Look at the partnerships landscape globally, look at some of those regulatory updates that I've just mentioned that will be particularly relevant for partnerships. Look at some of the tools that can be used and some of the approaches that, that institutions can take. And then just some of the considerations for those institutions looking at partnering with the US. And then after this, my colleagues, Roger and Mina, will be talking about their experiences from a very practical and relevant point of view. So I think that we should hopefully ensure that people are able to take away from this some really useful insights. So the key highlights from the NEP, and this is an amazing document that we all know has a 15-year lifespan, but some of the important things for this particular topic that we're talking about in higher education is the institutional restructuring and consolidation. So looking at the structure of higher education across India, looking at the position of colleges vis-a-vis universities, the structure and length of degree programs, and the whole thrust of this is to, I think, bring forward a structure and the systems and processes that will ensure that India is able to meet the needs of the young people and the demands of the economy and take its place on the world stage in international higher education and attract increasing numbers of international students and international staff. This will be underpinned, so these changes will be underpinned by a new regulatory framework with a single regulator for higher education, and this will be taking the approach of light but tight, absolutely ensuring that quality is at the heart of everything that's done, that the regulation is there to ensure that quality is maintained, but allowing institutions to have the flexibility and the autonomy to be able to develop their own relationships and develop their own unique offer in this environment. A very, very important part of the NEP is the focus on the research agenda, the establishment of the national research body, and the aim there is to catalyze quality academic research and to really push ahead across India. I mean, we know that India has incredible research going on, that there are centers of excellence, but the aim here is to have this spread more broadly and also to focus on the needs of India. And finally, and this is one of the things that as an international educator is something so exciting to me about the NEP, is that a lot of this is being looked at through a lens of internationalization, that a lot of the ambitions contained in the NEP will draw upon internationalization, and it will contribute to delivering those ambitions. So this puts internationalization at the very heart of the future for Indian higher education, which for me, as someone who has worked for many years and lives in India, is a very exciting thing to be involved with. Divya, thank you. I wanted to, just before I go into this, to look at sort of the partnership landscape globally and talk about this from my perspective when I was with my UK university. We always wanted to be able to establish partnerships in India, but because of the regulatory environment, it just was very, very difficult to get those partnerships going, to really be able to do the sort of things that we were able to do in other parts of the world. And, you know, partnerships between the UK and the USA, UK and Europe around research collaboration, student and staff exchanges were well established and supported by both foundations and government bodies, and, you know, really enriched those campuses. But we were not able to do the same things in India. Similarly in China, you know, for many decades now, huge numbers of partnerships between international universities and Chinese universities have contributed to the development of the higher education sector in China. And again, many of those partnership models were models that we, as international universities, wanted to be able to enter into in India, but were not able to because, again, of different structures, different regulatory environments. Now, it's very important to say that all of those models that I've just mentioned, they cannot simply be lifted and shifted and dropped into India. India's needs will be different. The models that will be developed for India, although they might have similarities, will need to make sure that they meet what is needed to be successful in India. So these are some examples of where partnerships have been developed and what different models, but they need to be nuanced to actually be appropriate for what the needs of India will be. Now, those regulatory updates, my slide there was talking about the fact that we always wanted to be able to deliver partnerships in India, but the regulatory challenges were very, very difficult. And the NEP has really started to unlock some of that. Some of the things that started to happen before the NEP, but of course in the context of the NEP coming out, but some of the key parts of the NEP that will contribute to the development of partnership opportunities are here. First of all, talking about the academic bank of credits. This is very, very important. Mobility only really works if students are able to take their credits with them, or if they've gone overseas for an experience, to bring those credits back and have them recognized. So this is an extremely important part of the jigsaw that will lead to the partnership landscape changing. And we know that this is on course to be a priority, to be delivered in the coming calendar year, maybe towards the end of the year. And there are many examples from around the world of where credit evaluation and transfer systems are in place and have enabled international mobility to start to take place. So I know that this will be something that will be delivered. I think the other important thing that came out this week, and again, it shows the impetus that is behind the NEP, it is the UGC draft regulations on cross-border collaborations. And this document has just gone out for consultation. It very clearly sets out what the agenda will be and what the parameters will be. It's clear that, again, there is an absolute commitment to quality and not compromising on quality, and suggestions have been put forward for the type of collaborations that will be supported. There is in the current document, there is a particular statement that franchising will not be allowed, but that there will be opportunities for joint degree programs, dual degrees, twinning arrangements, and again, all connected by that credit recognition and transfer system as well. And then one of the other key parts of the regulatory update will be around an expectation that all Indian institutions will set up international offices and ensure that there are staff who are trained and have the staff development to contribute to the delivery of an internationalization strategy across the universities. And this will be quite an important development to enable practical implementation of the aims of the NEP. Because one of the things that as a practitioner, sometimes people will say, but we don't know who to talk to. Where is the international office? How do I get to talk to the right people? So this signposting and signaling and development is quite important. Divya, could you? Thank you. And so building on that, I think one of the things that from my experience, you need to be able to do to set up strong partnerships is to have the right tools. And one of the key things is to make sure that you have your strategic objectives in place, that you're really clear about what you want to achieve, what you need to be able to do, and that you are able to get there. So setting out your clear strategy, making sure that that your partnership strategy is a reflection of your institutional strategy. Another area is having the operational mechanisms. And that's not just in the academic space. We've talked about credit transfer, we've talked about equivalences being developed to enable mobility, but you also need to have your registry able to support that. So you need not only the academic, but also the administrative systems and processes in place to support mobility, to support partnership working. Again, background and training of international officers, that will be a very, very important aspect of this development. In my experience in the UK, this started in probably about the mid-1990s, when people started to set up international offices. And what you now have across the whole of the UK sector is well-established international offices staffed by professionals who have the opportunity to develop their careers in this space and contribute to this strategic part of the university. I've already talked about systems and processes. Could you change the slide? Yeah, thank you. So partnering with US institutions, and I think you can sort of divide this up into these three buckets. Already talked about the fact that pre-partnership, you must be clear about your strategic objectives. You must have mission match and values aligned with the partners that you're going to work with, and strategic synergies. Otherwise, it can fail from the start. If there aren't those shared objectives, then the partnership can go awry. So the key to this is having the tools and targets that you need to then be able to deliver your strategic objectives. So developing capacity and capability across the institution. Institutional buy-in. This is really important from every level, from the senior level and the senior leadership, right the way down to the academics in the departments who need to be brought on board, who need to be able to see the benefits to them and how they can contribute. That is also a very important part of a successful partnership operation. You need to be clear about what models of partnerships you want to involve yourself in. So are you going to start with progression partnerships, articulation arrangements, or staff student exchanges? And often it's best to get the staff exchanges in place before the students, because then the students will tend to feel more comfortable and more empowered to take up those opportunities. So think about what models of partnerships you have an appetite for. The credit mapping process, again, it's important to have clarity about that so that the students can have a seamless experience and you can be sure that they will get what they need out of the partnership that you're setting up. Things such as very practical things, timing of the academic year. And then, of course, you need to ensure that you have the permissions and procedures at an institutional government level in place to ensure that this has got all the I's dotted and T's crossed. And then, you know, the student journey, and this is deliberately in the middle of this slide, students have to be at the heart of everything we're doing in this space and around partnerships. There has to be equivalent of experience. If you are setting up a joint program or a progression partnership, the students have to have had an equivalent experience to ensure that they can seamlessly transition and that they are having a parity with their colleagues who might be studying at the other campus. So important to have that understanding. Cost factors, you must be aware of what the cost and the implications will be around revenue and the scholarships in any particular partnership arrangement. These are important things, and if they're not, you know, clear at the beginning, they can lead to problems. English language proficiency, again, making sure that's part of the preparation of the students to be successful. So it's must ensure that that's in the right place. The facilities, everyone has clarity over what's needed, and admissions factors. So all of these are some of the things that you need to ensure you're thinking about. Grading systems, and everything is going to be built if you've got a deeper relationship, and opportunities for collaboration will flow out of even the you know, the smaller types of partnership that you might start off with. Ongoing considerations, these are some things that sometimes get overlooked. Marketing the course, it's going to be really, really important that the course is marketed effectively to ensure that you are getting the cohorts that you need, and that marketing is done in partnership. And so everyone is satisfied about what's being said and that the promises being made can be kept. You have to be aware of any particular IP issues, making sure that the intellectual property is secure and protected. And I think this is something that's very, very important. Managing expectations, both of the students, the staff members, and the institutions who are going to be part of these partnerships. You have to be able to be a problem solver and to have the goodwill to get those problems solved. All of that can be, I think, summed up in having good communication channels and good monitoring and metrics around quality to make sure that you are doing what you said on the can. And then you have to have the structures in place that make these partnerships sustainable. Because at the end of the day, it takes a lot of work to set them up, and you really do want to make sure that they have the life cycle that you're expecting.
Thank you, Delia, for setting the scene for all of us. I now want to kind of move into the section where I invite comments from Roger and Mina. So my first question is to you, Roger. What have been some of the successful partnerships that you have set up in the past, and what, according to you, were the key ingredients that made them successful?
Thank you, Lakshmi. I want to start by saying all of us in this work understand it's a process. I have some thoughts on the key ingredients, but I can also tell you that this is a continuous dynamic process over time. And I have just as many stories of partnerships that failed as I do of partnerships that were successful. So I think the key for me is that you establish common values. I'm going to sort of approach this question at a very high level, Lakshmi. We can get into more detail as we go along. But this cannot be transactional only. This isn't just about counting numbers. I really want you to think about what strategically you see as success. And then I want you to think about ensuring that you have common expectations with those colleagues that you reach out to. And again, we can talk a little bit more about that, but you're going to have to develop trust. There's going to have to be mutual respect, and there need to be common expectations. Delia said it beautifully. If you're looking for one thing and the colleagues overseas are looking for something else, you're misaligned. And it's highly likely that you will maybe have a lovely conversation, but very little more. So at a very basic level, I want you to think about the resources you have, the goals you have, what you would realistically like to see come out of any partnership. And then that's a place to start your conversations and to see if there's a match, or as I like to say, a goodness of fit. So I'd encourage you to start there. It isn't transactional. I'll give you this, you give me that. It's got to be deeper, more nuanced, and aligned to your values and your mission as an institution.
Okay. Mina, as someone who has lived through the pains and also the joys of setting up successful partnerships, I would very much welcome your views from the India side as to what has kind of made some of those partnerships work.
Thank you, Lakshmi. Delia very beautifully put out several factors that were important. Roger beautifully brought up some of the points I had. Now to that, I'd like to add 3 things. Trust, I agree, is a very important factor, and that needs to be built. But how do we build that trust? How does that process start? So for me, the 3 important ingredients I would say is, one is commitment from the top leadership of both institutions. I've found that when the commitment is only from one side and not in the other, it's very difficult to make headway because there are more challenges in these kind of partnerships. And therefore, commitment from both leadership is very important. And I think at NMIMS, I would like to say that we are lucky the international office is blessed to have the support of the top leadership, be it the Vice Chancellor, Chancellor, and so on. The second thing I think is the advocate or the champion in the partner school. Because just having the top leadership support is not adequate. How do you move forward? And I found in all the cases where we have been successful, one of the important ingredients is the role played by the advocate, by the champion, and we just cannot undermine that role. The third factor, I would say, is a strong international office which has the ability to collaborate with departments across the university, because a partnership or a collaboration is not the result of 2 international offices. It's the result of the collaboration between the legal departments, the marketing department, the deans of various schools, the HODs. And many times when I ask people what is challenging about this role, they say working with faculty is extremely challenging. And therefore, what I feel is one of the important ingredients is also the ability of the international office to win the trust and confidence of all these departments across the university. Otherwise, I think many a times we kind of take much longer than it would have normally required. You also asked to name some universities, and I'd be happy to name some of our successful partnerships. Of course, we have partnerships with several in the US, but I would particularly like to talk about Purdue University, where we've recently launched a very successful dual degree program, and probably we'll have another one coming up. Virginia University, where we've had some 4 or 5 programs launched in partnership, a unique 3+1+1 program, probably the first of its kind in India, one of the most challenging programs, I would think. The third one is the University at Albany, the State University of New York. And I'd also like to mention Stevens Institute. Of course, there are many, but you asked me to mention a few, and these are, top of the mind 3 universities I'd like to mention. And this is over, of course, what Roger and Delia have mentioned.
Okay, thank you, Mina. So, I have picked up between the 2 of you, definition of success, mutual respect, common expectation setting, commitment, advocacy from the champion at both ends, and an empowered international office as the critical kind of success factors for establishing sustainable and long-standing partnerships. That then takes me to my next question, which I would direct to you, Mina. Could you just provide some guidance on creating articulation agreements? What are some of the factors to keep in mind considering, the credit landscape and so on?
Yeah, so I presume everybody understands what we mean by articulation agreements. So I'm moving with that presumption. So I think some of the important factors, there are several, but I list 5 or 6 for the purposes of this discussion. First one is we need to understand what is the benefit of this agreement for the student. It's the student who's going to receive the benefit. So what does the student get has to be very clearly laid out. Have the specialization options increased because of this articulation? Tuition and scholarships? Are there OPT opportunities at the end of completing the program? Waiver of some SAT, GMAT, GRE requirements? The smoothing of the admission process? These benefits must be clear upfront because it's extremely important for the marketing of these programs to our students. Otherwise, why should anybody be opting for any of these dual degrees or joint degrees and progression agreements? Second one is extremely important is the transfer courses have to be clearly listed out. So if you have a student transferring from the Indian school to the foreign university, what are the courses which will be transferred? Not only the list of courses that will be transferred, but what are the credits? Because, courses could have 2 credits, 3 credits, 4 credits. But is your partner university accepting the number of credits you are allotting to that course? That has to be clearly laid out. There have been situations where the Indian university allocates 3 credits, but the US university maybe, is willing to accept it only at 2 credits. So it has to be, again, very clear in the articulation agreement. The third is the total number of credits to be completed for the degree to be awarded. Now, when we are saying the degree to be awarded, if it's a dual degree program, degree will be awarded by the Indian university and the US university. It makes it far more complex because the total credit requirement of both universities have to be met. And that makes these agreements even more complex. We'll probably use some examples later to bring this out. But if it's a twinning program where the degree has to be awarded, so far we've been doing situations where degree is awarded only by the US university. Then in that case, you've got to understand what are the total number of credits to be completed at the US university in order for the degree to be awarded. So total number of credits to be completed has to be clear to the student. Timelines for the completion of the program. Now, US universities are very flexible. We still have to get there. So student has the flexibility to complete the program, a 4-year degree over 5 years, 6 years. They're pretty flexible. But in India, I know in most cases, there's a certain timeline. So even if you're going abroad and it's a dual degree, it's, we may give you 2 additional years, or we might just give you 1 additional year. That has to be clear to the student, because otherwise in a dual degree, how do you get degrees of both universities? The student must know this upfront, and it should be clearly laid out in the articulation agreement. What are the minimum GPA requirements? Because the US university may say, we would accept students with a GPA of 3 and above, or whatever it is. Not only the total GPA, but also what is the minimum course grade? Will they take a grade of B minus, or will they only take a B and above, or a B plus and above? All of these, in fact, it's a long list, but I think top of mind, these are the 6 points which I think one needs to keep in mind while putting together an articulation agreement for dual degree programs and twinning.
Thank you, Mina. Roger, I can see you wanting to come in on this. So, moving from one system to another, the challenge is translation of credits.
Yeah.
So, I would very much welcome your views, in how you have kind of managed this in the past, and, if you could share some examples.
Sure. So listening to Mina, that was absolutely wonderful, Mina. But I imagine there's some of our colleagues on this call who that might be quite daunting. So let me take a step back. Firstly, it would be really helpful for you to identify peers who have successful agreements, such as NMIMS, and perhaps they can help you talk through what their agreement language looks like, not for you to copy, but for you to learn from. At the risk of being glib, there are some wonderful, wonderful partners, such as Sannam S4, And I also encourage you, if you're new to this, perhaps a conversation with the USIEF, who have been terrific partners to me over the past decade. So you're not alone in this work. And what Mina described there was a process that takes time. It can easily take 1 to 2 years to move from a first serendipitous meeting at a conference or on a webinar like this to a point that you have signing an agreement with your senior administration, your lawyers have looked at it, their lawyers have looked at it. So perhaps a place to start is with a non-binding opportunity. So maybe you start with a letter of intent or a non-binding MOU. And basically what you're saying is we agree to work together and let's see what we can do. And that gives you time to bring the faculty in, because as Mina rightly noted, if the faculty cannot find ways to articulate across courses and modules and give the appropriate credit, you're not going to be able to map out a program. From a US perspective, and this might be a bit of a generalization, so I'll own that up front, but I would think about considering a shorter opportunities first. So what would a year abroad look like? What would it look like, as Mina was suggesting, to do 3 years in India, maybe go to the US for a year, and then come back for your master's degree? And then as you move towards degrees and whole degrees, I would suggest to you that dual degrees, where an Indian institution has to satisfy the accreditation and quality assurance in India, and the US partner has to do the same in the United States, and then the student gets, in effect, 2 degrees, is probably easier to get to than a joint degree, where you're going to have to simultaneously get the approval of both accrediting agencies. So my suggestion is maybe start in a gradual process, because this will take time. And I think, and I suspect we'll come to this question, Lakshmi, but we also need to talk about how you identify who those institutions might be.
Okay, thank you, Roger. Roger, the next question on my mind, I mean, I'm sure you have spent some time looking at the latest draft regulations that the UGC has put out on February 17th. Any initial thoughts, reflections?
Well, I was thrilled to read it, Lakshmi. Historically, and our Indian colleagues may or may not be aware of this, opportunities for the United States higher education to engage in India have often come at a fairly hefty price related to Indian law. And so we're delighted to see this sign, this signal of internationalization and globalization. I'm delighted to see it because many people who work with our extraordinary partners in India understand that 1 in 10 people on the entire planet under 30 years old are in India. And that represents a potential population dividend. And it's no accident that this webinar features the 2 leading democracies in the world. And I think there are profound opportunities for US-India collaboration in higher education. And I'm excited to see the Indian government signal that. I think that there are still questions that have to be overcome here. You talked about the academic bank of credits, Delia. We absolutely will need to spend some time on that piece. It would be wonderful if we could move to a point where institutions get some templates, get some guidance on credit transfer and what will be agreeable. But in general, I think it's an opportunity. This will take time to do authentically. If you're a research institution, you're going to have to think about where are your research strengths and what are the research strengths we're looking for in a potential partner. If you are a strong academic institution, for instance, you may have a strong College of Engineering, where are your academic programs of excellence and how can you match those up? And while I recognize the value of global rankings, that is not the place to put down your flag. It might help you start to think about institutions. But in the United States, we have these large powerhouse research one institutions. And on the US side of this equation, they tend to be highly ranked. But there are some extraordinary small liberal arts colleges in the United States as well. And because their mission is different, they tend not to be as highly ranked. Then there are the private and the public, and issues of financial access and scholarship, as Mina was talking about a little earlier. So I think it's worth really thinking about how would we define the excellence of our institution, and then how would we think to match that with another institution? And then the NEP says, okay, now we're going to give you a level playing field, a level cricket pitch with a good bounce and is true to the batsman. Now go get it. And so I think that's how I think about the NEP.
Right. Thank you, Roger. And, I'm glad the cricket hasn't left you after many years in the United States. Mina, I have a question around scouting for the right kind of partnership. Obviously, Roger has just commented on that. But on the India side, there is a lot of interest in partnering, but how do you kind of look for the right partnership above and beyond, of course, two academics getting together and deciding that they want to partner on something?
So Lakshmi, that's an excellent question. And I've had people in the past also asking me that if NMIMS has been successful, then in some of these partnerships, how did you actually pick your partners? And so based on my experience in the international office for 3 years, here is an honest answer. People would like my answer to sound very strategic. It may not sound that strategic, but I will still tell you what the reality, at least in my case, is. In the case of our university. One I find is, of course, one needs to be clear with what one wants out of the partner. What is one looking for? To give you an example, we were looking for a dual degree program in business analytics. We were looking for a business analytics program, which is well ranked, in the United States. And we came up with a list of names. These are the possible schools which would be good to partner with for this soon to be launched dual degree program. And the task given to me with Mina, get the best university possible. I said, great. All of us want the best university possible. Now, the options before me were the following, and this is what I did. And honestly, this is exactly what I did. I'm telling you very honestly. One is, once you have a list of these universities, one needs to find a connect. I find writing an email to the provost or the head of the international office, just expressing my interest, at least hasn't worked most of the time. It does work, but most of the time it doesn't. So what I find has worked in our case is finding a connect. Now that connect may come from a faculty colleague in my university. Many times it comes from my top leadership. They've met people at various conferences. There are events which I have attended and I've got to know people. So we've all built a large network, and therefore using that network to write that first email does help me to move slightly quicker. Okay. Second thing, which I'd like to say with great pride about my university is, every year we collect data from our the examination office, that's the office which has this data. Where are our students applying? Which are the universities our students are applying to? We get very rich data. Like, for example, one of the names that came up was our engineering students are applying in large numbers to Buffalo University. And likewise, many others. Now, that's another way to pick a university. So when I started talking to Purdue, this was again through a connect which I met at a conference. They got interested right away. And I did ask them that, how did you, quickly get into this partnership? I said, Mina, we had great faith in your students. Several of your students are already doing the master's programs at Purdue. And that really worked in our favor. So I would think, people might use different ways, but I think generally some kind of connects. Your students are your brand ambassadors, and why not leverage that? And if one can have access to the data, I think these in combination have worked in picking up the partners that we've had. And of course, there are many more things that one can talk about, but this seems to have worked in our case.
Roger, do you have any comments on that? Because, people to people connect, data, and, student ambassadors. Any other points?
I appreciate the way you phrased the question, beyond bilateral one faculty to one faculty. I think Mina has focused on the critical issues here. In my experience, I get a lot of calls, a lot of emails from faculty at the institution that I represent who had a colleague that they did a PhD with 25 years ago at an Indian university, and they want to work with that Indian university. Those are not grounds for a relationship across the two institutions, and you need to appreciate that. What you're really looking for is to build a relationship, and relationships take time, they take effort. And to Mina's point, if you've already been introduced through your graduates or through a US faculty member who's come and spent a Fulbright at your institution, maybe has come and spent a sabbatical, these are great ways to enter into conversation. Maybe you offer a sabbatical in a strategic program. The institution in the United States will pay for their faculty to come, and then you can begin to use that person as an ambassador across the two institutions. So between your student ambassadors, and Mina, thank you, that was a great comment, but also look for ways to have a faculty member or an administrator who understands the objectives and the goals to be that initial vanguard for the effort. I think that's incredibly important. There are creative ways to do that.
Okay, thank you. Mina, an interesting question has popped up here, and I thought, I should direct this to you. A question has come from one of the listeners around student exchange programs and whether, the new draft regulations make the credits on student exchange programs, come under its umbrella.
Very good question. So we're talking about student exchange programs. Actually, the policy is not talking so much about student exchange as much as, a twinning program and dual degrees, but I think the same would apply in the case of student exchange programs. Now, the two challenges that need to be addressed. So the policy is very forward-looking, but we still need to address the two challenges when we talk about an exchange. So when a student goes and exchange, those credits have to be transferred to the home university. Now, one of the challenges that I think most of our universities face, and I see that in my university too, let's take an example of an undergraduate program, and I'll take my own university example. Let's take a BBA program, okay? A BBA program typically in India requires students to do about 145 credits, 140, 150 credits. A bachelor's program in the US typically requires students to do about 120 credits, okay? 120 credits over 4 years versus an Indian BBA, which is 145 credits over 3 years. So typically a student does 24 credits a semester. Now, if a student has to go on an exchange to a US university, how many credits would that student be doing? Typically 15 credits.
Yeah.
So 15 credits at a US university, 24 credits at an Indian university. Now, the challenge we face is when the student comes back and if the UGC guidelines have to be met, how do you award the degree when you're not able to complete the required number of credits? So one needs to address, and that's why exchange doesn't happen in such large numbers. I mean, some universities have been able to find a way around this, but I think most of us are still struggling. So our MBA programs have been able to address this challenge, and they do have exchange programs in large numbers. And actually that's the cornerstone of a lot of our MBA programs. But one of the challenges is with regard to credits. And I think somewhere we need to address this in order to be able to have students transfer smoothly from one university to another for a semester or even for a year.
Interesting. Okay.
And second, okay.
No, I just wanted to ask, like, the NEP provides for a 4-year undergrad, right? It is the public embrace of liberal arts education that I have seen, through the NEP. And are we envisaging that the 145 credits get stretched across the 4 years, or is that over and above the 145 that we have always done across a 3-year program, there is a research component that then gets loaded on top of that, because that then makes it even more complicated, doesn't it?
Yes, so I agree. There's a proposal in the new education policy, and it's wonderful to have the 4-year program. But if you must have noticed, students have the option to do a bachelor's degree in 3 years, and only people who are interested in research would go on to the 4th year. So that's going to be a small number of students who would be interested in the 4-year degree versus the 3-year degree. So the India's 4-year degree, as emphasized in the new education policy, is not similar to the 4-year degree of the US system. And therefore, I think the number of credits may come down, and I think they should come down. And I think many times I wouldn't like to put the entire blame on the UGC. Sometimes I think universities are overly ambitious. Indian universities do believe that having a program with higher number of credits means higher value. We're probably able to demonstrate more value to our students. We have to move away from that. So I wouldn't completely blame the UGC for that. So some of these things need to change, and I think universities are now ready to change, and therefore in the next couple of years, we should be able to have this smooth exchange possible. Once we're able to bring these credits under manageable levels, I think that should happen.
So that then takes me to a point on competencies that Roger made before we started this webinar. So Roger, I would really welcome your comments here in terms of outcomes versus inputs.
Well, okay. Well, we're getting into some feisty territory here, Lakshmi. I mean, I made the comment in the United States, 120 US credit hours for a degree is the gold standard, but that's an abstract. Well, we've made it a practical management of courses and expenses issue. 120 hours is no better or no worse than 110 or 100 or 130 or 140. It really depends on the student and the student's capacity to demonstrate the objectives of their program, of their major. And some students are brilliant and in actuality could reach the requirements of graduation in less than 120 hours. Some need more support, and for them learning is more of a challenge, and actually they need more than 120 hours. So that's more a management, it's more an administrative construct within the notion of the United States. I did want to say something, Lakshmi, about Mina sharing. Mina articulated beautifully all the things that have to go into an agreement. The time to be clear about all those issues is before you sign the final agreement, not after.
Yeah.
And so you really have to work through that. And that's why this takes diligence and time. And one last comment on this. From a US perspective, we only send a fraction of the students, US nationals abroad, that we bring in as international students. And part of the reason for that is because historically, they've often been able to spend a semester or a year abroad, but they've never got full student credit for it. If you want US students to come and study in India, or indeed anywhere around the world, build articulations, build agreements where they will get full credit for the year, because otherwise they feel punished and it delays their graduation. So this conversation that Mina was having with you all is super important. Thank you.
Delia, I can see you holding a finger.
Yeah, no, I was just going to add to that.
Exactly 30 seconds.
Okay. The Europeans have also had to struggle with this, and there is a way to do it. So you can actually work that out. And then you can also build a bridge between the US, Europe, and India, and use all those different ways of calculating those credits.
Okay, so there is, where there is a will, there is a way. And on that positive note, I want to thank CG Rantz for, hosting this session and setting the scene, and my wonderful panelists who have, such a lot of experience and have contributed so much to this discussion. And as Roger mentioned, there is probably an opportunity here for many, many more webinars to try and kind of unpack the various elements of making successful partnerships and also sustainable partnerships. So on that note, thank you all for dialing in and joining in and listening and contributing to this discussion. And I wish you all a very good day ahead, wherever you are, and good evening to all of you who joined here in India. Thank you very much, and see you all soon. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Namaste.